Cal Poly. That was 44 years ago. I had been at Penn for my PhD program, and Louis Kahn was there, and Bucky Fuller and McCarg and several other people. And it was the first time I actually saw creativity in architecture schools at that level, recognizable. I mean, my undergraduate was pretty much University of Cincinnati and laying bricks in the summer. So since I've been here, I have matured along with my students, because I have students' dad right there, which makes me granddad. And
40 years ago.
I've been inspired by students here. I've thought a lot about ideas. And I went to Mexico City, just saw some building, big white building, hotel. And it's Baroque architecture. That's what this is, Baroque versus classic. The flat plains, classic, Baroque. And Baroque is about the spinning of the universe, right? Multiple spinnings of the universe, solar systems and all that stuff, versus just the flat plane, because flat planes, Fuller said, didn't exist. So if you take a beam, you go like this, and here's a spin, then this is going to be closer to the center, and it'll be pulled down more. That's why you put the rebar in there. And even though it's called architecture, tectonic of arches, this is not, except for the steel, the beam. But the cathedrals were all arches, so it's tectonic of arches. So this is closer, in my mind, to tectonic of arches. You see the arches in the movements, the Baroque movements of these models. And by definition, it's actually more structural than a box, because a box would go like that. Fuller delivered a lecture here a long time ago, and he says, what keeps the box straight? He says diagonal, right? But in reality, Newton took boxes, stacked them on triangles, right? Which made calculus. And you could then measure movement and sizes and everything else. On the computer, I've been scribbling like that, doing the world's names. The computer measures. That's so beautiful. I don't have to. It's already measured. So, anyway, what these are towers, a hotel tower, entertainment, and then a shopping center over Madonna overpass. It goes through this way, and then the overpass goes up to that. So there's an arch built into these, over the overpass, and there's a flat area. So you get to see both of them against the horizon. As you see, this is that, and the horizon. If I were in Indiana, it would be me sitting flat. I'm here. So, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Serafina Sinti. My intention for this project was to model a large-scale sculpture that one could exist in and appreciate. For the looming hotel, I first searched for smaller angular pieces to allow for a more expressive form. Right here. Very few buildings in San Luis Obispo acknowledge the stunning mountain range in the distance, so I strove to create a form that not only cradled the airspace, but drew your eye up and towards the hills, a fluid motion of form and experience. I also placed the hotel room pods on this wave to allow the visitors to exist in this motion. A nod to the Madonna hotel experience, each hotel room pod has a unique interior design and layout, as seen in here. So each of these hotel room pods you can just move out here and place on there, wherever you want. I'll just put there. So when creating this model, I was ecstatic about the program and how we were going to kind of figure out what was going on. So we drove in trash bins, we explored Home Depot. My mom came out and gave me a whole bunch of random parts from her school that she didn't need to use. I took apart a projector and just looked at what was happening inside, because we were designing out of pre-designed parts. We didn't have to start from scratch. Some designer had already started for us. We just needed to continue the group project and create our own design. And that really excited me, because it was essentially just a massive group project. And not every group member knew that they were going to be a part of this, but I still was excited to collaborate with co-designers and create something bigger and better and different than what they were planning on using that form for. I'm a physical learner, so each three-dimensional piece that I placed on my tower opened up a new set of infinite possibilities. The studio allowed me to explore design in such a creative way. I loved playing with the different pieces. I loved the infinite possibilities. As you can see, Alan and I came up with two incredibly different models, but we were each given the same prompt. And I don't know, I just had an amazing time, and I love how infinite these buildings can be. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Maedo. Welcome to my rendezvous project. So the prompt of the project was build a tower, build an overpass at Madonna and the 101. And given how free the project was, it was up to me to kind of interpret that and what all this means to me. So what makes SLO interesting to me is how culturally centrally located it is between Northern and Southern California, between LA and SF. And SLO is kind of that midpoint, that intersection between all these different people from North and South. And I wanted to play on that fact of, can this be like a rendezvous point between those two big cultural entities? And all the program, all the stories, everything that I do, all derives from the model. So the first phase of the project was making this tower. My roommate has a yerba mate obsession, so that's how I started the tower. We started rising over. And then I started spanning over the freeway this quarter, and I started going over and over and over and started articulating. And as I started refining the model more and more, I started thinking carefully about how they're placed and all that stuff. And I didn't try to inject my own program, didn't try to force anything in, but rather let the parts speak for themselves. So, for example, like these tubes right here, I didn't like try to force like something in there. Rather, maybe they're mechanical tubes and they allow for air intake and HVAC and all that stuff. And I started going to delve more into the project. I started looking at this and hey, like I'm like suspending things. Maybe I can inject a program that can like be suspended within this model. And that's how I injected the idea of like a movie theater into this project, being suspended and levitated. And to get the elephant out of the room, like this monstrosity being located in SLO is kind of ridiculous. But so I started approaching the project more about how can it be used for future implications, how can it evolve, how can it grow. So for these yerba mate bottles, when I was building it, I'm like, hey, how high do I go? Should I stop here or here? I'm like, why can't it just keep growing and growing? So I thought about these pods as being prefabricated things, and you just erect steel columns, and the pods keep growing and growing and growing, and then detailing out like how that all comes together. And then as I refined more into the details, I made sure to not let the changing scales influence how I design. So I still found parts, still put them together. Yes, I like laser cut over things, but I still let that process of refining not get in the way of using found objects. And for my section, I thought about maybe like kind of showing off how basic and refine. And what I did, or what me and some of my classmates is you want to hold that up to the section. We thought about, and then so we thought about like visually modeling it and like kind of like showing off how that looks like extruded. And ultimately, this project is about bringing people together, how it can be used for future implications. And I love everything I did. My dad's here, he took John. And, yeah.
You guys know technology much better.
Also, check out the detail model. There's some little text bubbles.
It really like joyous exploration of what architecture can be and how to make things, which seems like you guys really enjoyed and really had a good time. I think one of the things that when you are using objects, as you said, that were already designed by somebody else, it does introduce arbitrariness to the work, which you look at the pieces and you see it not as a hanger or an egg beater or a cap of a spray bottle, but you see it as itself, as a designed object, and it's only later that you realize, oh wow, like these little sort of vignette models that you've got for your pods on your board are quite compelling. They're very good. You have the little scale models in there, you can understand the space. I think it's less accessible when you have sort of people kind of at 90 degrees to the earth. So just being quite careful with how you articulate the found objects is important. And actually your large model, I loved it that you put sort of figures in and you had them saying things. Like you imagine people in this space like, I have no feet, or I'm going to yell in this theater, or something like that. And that like, even the figures you thought about how they inhabited the space, which is when you're making something out of things that are, Monte bottles, the things that are already there, taking it to the next level and imagining spatially what is that is very smart. Really
So these two projects really do encompass a lot of the reason for why people get into architecture. Not necessarily like I'm going to build a house for my mom, blah blah blah. It's, you know, I want to build something cool that people can appreciate. And so really these are just, they're like the most basic version of that. You know, you take things that you just find and throw them together. And I think on a previous review, there was a mention made about, you know, this hands-on element and basically feeling what looks good, you know. And so I'm not going to say John's typical models are a lot about what feels good, but you know, these are not your ordinary, put it that way. And so the result is just, it's really an exploration in that creativity and feel. And the outcomes, you know, are always different. But you know, I gotta ask, did you like 3D scan your project? You modeled that?
Yeah.
Dear God.
There's a lot of like little number marks.
We did.
Some of them still I didn't get spray painted on. Some of them.
Cool. You get some extra credit for that.
But yeah, this is right on.
You worked,
Yeah.
you did about 50, 100% more than most people, and they did a lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah, it's always difficult. I would imagine, at least I never took John, but it would be difficult to take something that's found object like this and actually be able to implement a reality to it. You know, and looking at your sections, it's like how did you find that? And it brings some realism back to it. So I really appreciate that.
Ladies first.
So I think, you know, the comment that I have, or what's sort of come to mind as you were speaking, is about, in particular, as you're talking about this being a kind of collaborative project with other people who have designed things in the past and are not actually aware of their participation, right? And so this led me to think, just as a kind of theoretical, you know, a thought exercise, if you had considered, or I would encourage you to, if not, how the buildings that you've designed then could become, you know, found objects for a future generation or a different designer, and how, you know, you've both considered very carefully the accumulation of parts, you know, coming into this building, but is there a point at which then its parts begin to disperse again, for example? And so I think that would be, you know, yet another kind of layer on top of the way that you're thinking about what you're making, that could give it a kind of added richness. But I really commend everything that you've tackled and accomplished in this time. It's great.
Experimental activity thought is extraordinarily important in architecture, and I think this is obviously one of the more profound examples of it. I want you all to both take a few minutes though and talk a little bit more about what you have realized. And I'll say this quickly. Sometimes when an artist does something, he or she produces something, it means one thing to them, and then it means something else to the public. And that reinforms their thought process sometimes. So after having created this, generated this, what are the spatial implications that you guys are realizing? And you can talk about it in terms of experience, functionality, lack thereof, or whatever.
Well, to me, the project spoke a lot about my own process and how like I design, and so a lot about like finding these parts. I don't know, like when at a certain point I kind of like work between physical and digital, and in between that I try not to lose the spatial qualities that these parts create. Yes, it's not exactly in digital or physical, but I still like allow that. I still want to keep the experiential qualities of the found objects, not necessarily let it evolve by finding it as it matters.
I think for a project so limitless, you have to create your own limits. And every single person in our studio created their own parameters. So for me, I strove to create a space with found objects where you would look at a found object and not necessarily see that object. So I put a straight up coat hanger in here, and I looked at it and I saw a coat hanger. So I ripped it in half, and now if you look at it and you know it's a coat hanger, you can see that it is, but you would have to try really hard to figure that out. And so I think that creating a space, I wanted you to be able to experience it as a whole, as a structure, as a building, instead of as this is a whole bunch of tiny trash.
And to play off of that, these pieces also become like structural and spatial at the same time. So they serve a structural purpose because it's being held up. And
Scale is really important
Yeah.
too. Alan and I talked a lot about just the different scale, because you can create something so monstrosity and like just big. Like this can be a tiny little chair if you flip it the right way, or it can be a whole entire
I agree.
theater. Like it depends on how you view it. So you have to just set your limits and say, well, what is this? And kind of go from there.
And I know we have to wrap up. The one last thing I want to say about this, I hope you guys do realize the sort of implications about the future. A lot of times you see certain movies, you think about this kind of apocalyptic scenario and what would happen if, and how these things can grow, and realizing that we as architects need to think simultaneously about that big picture as well as the microcosms, which I think you both have sort of done. But I'm also wondering if you have really realized those spatial implications as it relates to the program. Great work.